return to that breaking news coming out of the United States. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died. Well, let's explore what she meant in terms of a historical and political figure to the United States and to women right around the world. We'll turn to Joe Moreno, who is a former federal prosecutor. We've reached him in Alexandria, Virginia. Joe, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Hi, Natasha. It's good to be with you, although under really, really sad circumstances.
It really is. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the type of character that, regardless of where you stood on the political spectrum, you were sort of hoping she's tough. You know, she's going to make it through. She kept going into hospital and she kept coming out fighting and had that great smile on her face. So you just thought, okay, that's the same thing that's going to happen this time. Initially, right off the bat, what are you seeing in terms of reaction? What are you hearing from your colleagues?
Well, Natasha, I think the first reaction, rightfully so, is sadness, right? This is an American legend. This is a person that, again, like you say, regardless of politics, she was a trailblazer. She was not the first woman on the Supreme Court. She was the second, but she really, really made her impact. And to an entire generation of young people, much younger than her, she is the face of the Supreme Court, right? She is the leading progressive voice in some of the largest opinions that have come out in the last decades now. And even when she was in the minority, she made her voice very much heard. After sadness, though, the next question is politics, right? We have a few months until the election. President Trump may not be in office much longer. Does he move forward with a successor? And it will be a brutal fight if that's the case. This is already a very, very hard-fought election season that we're dealing with here in the U.S. If you lump a nomination of a beloved Supreme Court figure, it will make it even more bitter here in Washington.
So, Joe, let's break that down a little bit. What do you think the likelihood is that Trump, in the middle of both the campaign and the pandemic and the economic crisis, is now going to push ahead and say, I need to get this done before November?
I think it's very likely. I mean, this president and the Republican majority in the Senate have made the nomination and confirmation of federal judges its top priority these past 4 years. And the idea of a Supreme Court vacancy, the third one for President Trump in just a single 4-year term, is historic. Doesn't mean it's a good historic, but I think that it's very likely the Republicans will move forward very aggressively. They've already indicated a list of potentials that are waiting in the wings. And I think that you could see perhaps nothing else happen in the next few months except for a focus on a nomination and a bitter confirmation hearing.
Do you think that this issue of an opening within the Supreme Court, on the Supreme Court, could sway voters one way or the other?
Yes, it will. And I could see the argument actually on both sides. I think on the one hand, the president's supporters will probably like the fact that the president will no doubt nominate someone who is conservative, who is probably young, possibly a woman. And I think that will get them excited, as the president has had good success in the last two Supreme Court nominations he's made. On the flip side, I think the progressive side of this country will be very fired up. I think that they will see not only the sadness in the loss of an icon, but I think what they'll view as very unfair that you have a president that perhaps is in the waning months of his administration to move forward with a nomination. And they will no doubt look back to the case of Merrick Garland, who back in 2016 was President Obama's choice to fill the seat of then deceased Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, and the Republicans denied him that nomination. And they basically said, we're not going to do a Supreme Court vacancy in the final year of a president's term. Well, guess what? We are possibly in the final year of a president's term. And now when the president has the opportunity to move forward, and if he does it, I think you'll see a lot of bitterness on the other side.
Well, that's what I'm curious about. So if there is bitterness on the other side, and it could sway voters one way or the other, might it work against him to push ahead with a Supreme Court justice?
Look, there's certainly an argument that the sort of an olive branch would be for the president to say, look, I've had two nominations. That's actually a pretty good record for a one-term president, or at least first-term president. Let's wait and see how the election shakes out. And then either I, in a second term, meaning President Trump, or my successor will get to nominate the person who should replace Justice Ginsburg. That would be a very magnanimous gesture. Those types of gestures are not that common these days in Washington, so I think it's unlikely. But yes, there's an argument that that would be a nice way to approach this.
Do you know if the president has heard about this yet? I'm sure the news would have gotten to him by now, no?
I would, if I know about it and we all know about it, most likely President Trump knows about it.
Okay. I believe we have a live shot of the president speaking. He's at one of his rallies where he's making his case to the public for why he should be reelected. We don't know at this stage at News Network whether he's addressed this issue or not. What do you think the likelihood is, Joe, of him addressing it tonight if he finds out in the middle of that thing?
If he does, I really hope for his sake and the country's sake that he does it respectfully, and that the crowd and the reaction that they make is a respectful one. I think it would be a nice small gesture of goodwill, which frankly is lacking in this town these days, unfortunately. So that's my hope here.
What do you anticipate is going to happen in the days ahead, not politically speaking, in terms of remembering this woman? You know, we've so often, you know this, talked about 2020. It's just been one hit after the next. You know, it's just, I know every year is full of news, obviously, but this year just seems to not relent. And with the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it really does seem like, oh my gosh, one more hit on our collective psyche. How do you think she's going to be remembered? What do you think we're going to be hearing from her colleagues, from politicians, from celebrities?
You know, Natasha, one of the things that really has stuck out with me when I read about Justice Ginsburg is that regardless of politics, she forged actual, true, legitimate friendships with her colleagues on the Supreme Court, both Republican and Democrat nominated. So I think it's going to be her good character, her good nature, her tenaciousness, her ability to fight cancer against the odds and stay in office despite her advanced age. And so my hope is that the country can take this tragedy and actually maybe come together, even if it's just for a few days or a few weeks, and remember a great American, a great attorney, and someone who's been an inspiration for a generation of young women and young men and young lawyers and young Americans.
Okay, so let's talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a young woman. You're a federal prosecutor, former federal prosecutor. You know how tough those areas of the law can be, how difficult it can be to navigate oneself, and how cutthroat it can be. And this is a young woman many decades ago making her way through these corridors of the law and of politics and rising to the highest office in her particular field. What do we know about her as a young woman, the type of legal mind that she had?
Growing up and graduating law school at the time that Justice Ginsburg did, for a woman, she was already in the great minority, right? Just to begin with, as lawyers. As you advance through your career in the law, whether it's in law firm practice or federal government practice or the judiciary, there are even fewer women. So the fact that she did rise to this level in this period of time is remarkable. And so I think that she will be remembered for that, and rightly so. And I think that coupled with her brilliance and her wit and her charm, and she's a figure that will be very difficult to replace.
You know, you referenced that this ability to make friendships with people she vehemently disagreed with. And I think one of the most, if you'll allow me, adorable ones was this friendship she had with Antonin Scalia, who also sat on the Supreme Court. Hardcore conservative, couldn't be more different than her in terms of political perspective. And yet they were kind of like this oddball couple. They really dug each other. They were good friends.
That's right.
And how did their friendship get perceived in Washington?
It was perceived as the rare occurrence. I mean, this used to be much more common here in Washington in decades past, where you could have people that were vigorous opponents, whether they were in Congress, in the Senate, in the House, even in the executive branch. But you would hear that they would break bread after hours, right? They would argue all day on the floor, but then they would get together for drinks. They were personal friends. They didn't take cheap shots at each other. And that's what we read. And, you know, about Antonin Scalia, that's exactly who I was thinking of, Natasha. And the reports, remember, he died very suddenly in office in 2016. And the reports were that Justice Ginsburg was seriously longing and mourning her colleague. And again, they could not be more different. You had two opposite ends of the political spectrum there. And yet you had two people who valued each other's opinions, who respected each other's intellect. And that is so rare here in the U.S. these days.
And so desperately needed. Joe, thank you so much for making time for us so suddenly, because this news just broke a short while ago. We really appreciate your insights and your time. And thank you for helping us understand who this remarkable woman was. We appreciate it.
Of course, Natasha. Good to be with you.
Take care. Joe Moreno, former federal prosecutor, joining us from Washington.